It seems anywhere you go these days, you'll drive past a solar panel array. More and more communities are striking agreements with energy companies to install the solar panels, often atop landfills. Carolee McGrath spoke with Rick Sullivan, CEO of the Economic Development Council of Western Massachusetts and former Massachusetts Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, to learn more about this trend.
You're starting to see in Massachusetts a real growth in the solar industry, and in fact, adoption of solar, both at the local and residential sector, but also in the business sector as well. And the state policies have really tried to drive the energy decisions towards solar in particular. And so with the incentives and the other programs that are out there, people are becoming adopters of that.
So when you're driving around the area, I mean, I just noticed one in Wilbraham, I drove by one in Springfield. I know that Westfield has a new one, as well as Chicopee and Holyoke. How does this work for municipalities?
Sure. So the state, through the incentive program, has really incentivized, if you will, communities to look at the tops of their landfills, the tops of or sites that are environmentally need to have cleanup. Municipal buildings are all highly incentivized. So when a community goes to take advantage and determines that that's a good use for those types of facilities, then really there are kind of three buckets of conversation to have, so that when they're putting together their pilot agreement with the solar developer, they're looking at what can it raise for revenue or taxes. So they, as with any other kind of a commercial operation, the solar array will in fact pay taxes into the community. The community can also talk about getting cheaper power, since obviously the array will be producing power. So they can have that conversation about, okay, maybe some in taxes, some in cheaper power. And then the third bucket is what will happen with the asset in the longer term, whether it's 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road. Does it become a municipal asset? So that's a negotiation that each community will have with each developer, quite frankly, and each community will do it a little bit differently. Some may be much more interested in only having it pay taxes. Others may be interested in uses or ultimately end up owning the asset. And obviously overlaying the whole thing is the environmental decision to be going to a cleaner, renewable energy, which Massachusetts has, again, incentivized to have happen. And you're seeing that adoption. And in fact, what you're also seeing is during the summertime, which is obviously a peak for air conditioning and other electrical uses, you're starting to see that peak come down because people are using solar. They're also heavily invested in energy efficiencies. So that peak is coming down, and ultimately in the long term, what will happen is the power companies have to buy for that peak at all times. So as that peak starts to come down, then they will be able to have cheaper power longer term.
I'm sure you have some pushback in some communities, though, because just like anything else, people might consider it an eyesore. Oh my gosh, you've got all these silver panels, on the side of the road. Is that an issue?
There is no energy decision that doesn't have some controversy on the other side, no matter what it is. Even energy efficiency has critics. And there are decisions you have to make with energy. None of them are easy. And you're correct. Solar is the same, and certainly neighbors don't want to be able to see it from their house, so that there will in fact be opposition. In theory, everybody thinks that's a good thing, but again, it depends on where it is sited in a community. The state also made some decisions in the last round of its regulations and did less incentives for kind of open field arrays, if you will, towards more incentives towards municipal buildings, landfills, and sites that needed to be remediated.
And how about homeowners as well? Because I feel like that's another area where you drive down the street and you see more and more people with panels on their rooftops.
So Massachusetts also has, the ability in some communities to be able to what they call net meter into the grid. So you're using your own power, number one, and anything that's kind of left over, you have the ability to sell back to the power company, if you will, or back to the grid. So it can become a revenue generator for, a homeowner or a business, depending on the situation. Not in all cases. So, you need to know the rules in each community and each case. But it does have the ability there. And in Massachusetts, we don't have to have the discussion about, the issues of global warming or the environment. For the most part, people, obviously understand that. And so part of the decision-making process, that if it can be cost competitive, individuals, whether it's homeowners or it's businesses, will make the decision to do renewable, cleaner energy. And so you are seeing, wide adoption across Massachusetts. We're one of the leaders in the country, and you wouldn't think coming from New England, which, it can be cold here,
Right.
maybe not today, but, you wouldn't think that we would do more installations than, say, Florida, the Sunshine State. But in fact, Massachusetts is one of the leaders in adoption of solar.
But it's become less expensive, right? Because the private industry is now driving it. Because a few years ago, it was sort of like, there's all these incentives, and the private industry wasn't jumping in. But it seems that that's turning.
So I think you got two things going on there. One is absolutely that's what private industry does. So private industry will find a way to manufacture the panels and do it better and cheaper. Installation better and cheaper. So the costs are in fact coming down, and they are starting to be on their own becoming more competitive with kind of the standard energy choices that are out there. The other thing again is the environmental decisions that people are making. They're willing to pay a little bit more for that, but at the same time, it does need to become cost competitive. So I do think that in the longer term, and that's 5 years, maybe it's 10. Those incentives have to be able to go away, and solar will have to be able to stand on its own as a cost-competitive alternative to the standard sources of energy.
Do you think it will? Do you think
I absolutely think it will, and I think it will happen quickly. And as your question actually is right on, private industry is finding better and cheaper ways to manufacture the panels and to do the installs. So the costs are coming down, and that is only gonna accelerate. As the very smart people in private industry figure a way to do it better.
And now 20 years down the road at a solar array, what happens to those panels? Are they taken down? Is it obsolete?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it depreciates as with any other asset, and I think so. The company business model typically is looking at that kind of a time frame. That 20 years out, it's probably not generating, at peak capacity. So panels can be replaced, but there probably needs to be some other investment. But it isn't totally zero either.
A lot of good information on this. I appreciate you coming in to talk about it.
And thanks for having me.